On today's Football Friday of Locked On Jayhawks, which transfer addition will make the biggest impact in 2024?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio, and you can find our show. It's called Locked On Jayhawks, anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. Thank you to the everydayers tuning in to each and every episode. And thank you to you for, if this is your first episode, hopefully you can become an everydayer. We're going to get into which KU football transfer portal pickup will make the largest impact for Kansas in 2024. Then we'll get into what about a transfer who's in a multiple year, second, third, fourth year at KU, which of that group will make the biggest impact. And then we're 62 days away from Kansas's first game of the season happening against Lindenwood. So we'll get into that all on today's Football Friday episode of Locked On Jayhawks, which is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, there's always stuff going on, right? We got the Olympics, we got the Copa, we got the Euro, we got golf tournaments going on, we got baseball, Royals are back, and FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Let's start right here. Which Kansas football transfer edition will make the largest impact in the 2024 season? So specifically, these are just looking at players who Kansas added, whether it was in the winter, basically from when last season ended to when this next season will begin. It could be in the spring. They obviously added some very big, impactful players this past spring. And who will make the biggest impact in 2024? Honestly, the answer to this question might have been Deshaun Hanukkah had he not suffered his injury. Sounds like it was a bad injury in spring ball that's probably going to keep him out for the season. And to that notion, we'll see if he ends up taking a medical red shirt and comes back for another year, or if, because he had this injury after he had to sit out a year, like maybe he's just like, I'm ready to move on. I don't know what's going to happen there. But point being, if he would have been healthy, he probably would have been tight end number one for Kansas. And an offense with Jeff Grimes that uses the tight ends a lot, and productive player in his past with Iowa State, like he might have made the biggest impact of all the transfers coming in. So unfortunate there that he is injured. Just kind of sifting through guys and eliminating guys real quick. I wouldn't pick Shane Bumgarner. KU just brought in Bryce Foster from Texas A&M. So Shane Bumgarner, who you brought in from the Division II level, who was a great center at Division II level. When you brought him in, the thought was, okay, maybe he can start. Maybe he can be your next Dominic Pooney type coming from a lower level to become a starter on your team. But it doesn't sound like that was a guarantee after spring ball, so much so that Kansas found the opportunity to bring in Bryce Foster and did just that. So I think the expectation becomes, okay, Foster is probably going to start for you at center. Bumgarner becomes probably the second string center. And I guess you're always an injury away. I mean, Foster's had to deal with some injuries throughout his time in college that Bumgarner could still be the answer, but on paper right now, that would not be the one you would give. Emil Herring from Michigan. He could end up being one of the better players that you added in the portal this year in terms of long-term career and where eventually his ceiling goes to. Former four-star offensive lineman who's at Michigan. But this year, I think he's more going to be depth and maybe more of a big-time future impact guy. Like, I think it'd be a good thing for Herring if he could crack the two deep at some point this year, because he's joining after spring ball. It takes time to acclimate to the offense. If he eventually becomes, whether it's, a second-string guard or something like that, like Kobe Baynes did his first year at Kansas, and then, now Kobe Baynes was playing starter-level snaps a year ago and could start this year too. Like, I think that could be a path that he follows, except with maybe even a bigger ceiling there. Bryce Cohoon, that was a transfer he added from Syracuse, more of a future kid, and also he's a preferred walk-on right now, so not going to pick that one. Then you have the category of players who, like, they could start or they could not, but they're still going to play. So then you're trying to decipher that. Darrell Simmons Jr., transfer he brought in from Iowa State, he has a ton of experience starting games at the Big 12 level. He could start at guard for Kansas, or he might not. Like, Michael Ford's probably going to start at one guard spot. Now that you add Bryce Foster, he's probably the center. Who's going to start at the other guard spot? Could it be Kobe Baynes, who I just talked about? Could it be Darrell Simmons Jr.? Could it be, Nolan Gorchika, right? Like, you have options there to play guard. if he ends up starting, there's a chance he could make the biggest impact. But if he's a rotational guard, probably not going to be the case. And then Javier Darrett, kind of in the same situation. Transfer from North Dakota State. I think he'll be a solid defense tackle for KU. There's a chance he could start. He could be one of your starters. He could be your best defensive tackle. But there's also a chance that Tommy Dunn and Caleb Taylor could start, or that DJ Withers and Tommy Dunn or DJ Withers and Caleb Taylor could end up starting, and Darrett's coming off the bench. Now, the one thing, I mean, Kansas did basically use 6 offensive linemen starting level snaps a year ago, so that could happen with Simmons Jr. But more realistically, like, the rotation is going to be more depth-driven at defensive tackle than it will on offensive line. So even if Darrett was coming off the bench and he's your third D tackle, he could still make a big impact and play a lot of snaps. So that one maybe would be interesting, but still no obvious answer here. I think this, then you get into a guy like Devin Dye, who's going to play some, but be more of a rotational backup. That's probably the same category. Like, I'm viewing Leighton Cure. Like, I think Leighton Cure, even as preferred walk-on, but one that will probably be on scholarship for the following season. He could end up winning the third tight end job, and Kansas plays a lot of formations and snaps with the third tight end. Like, he would get some snaps, but same with Devin Dye, more of a rotational role. I think this kind of comes down to probably 3 guys: Dylan Wudke, Bryce Foster, and Bai Jobe. And so I think all of them have different paths you can go down here. With Bryce Foster, he is, I guess you would say, the most accomplished at the Power 5 level, the most accomplished at the Division I level, the most accomplished collegiate player, right? He started a bunch of games at the SEC level at Texas A&M. He has maybe the best combination of floor and ceiling. Like, you could argue Bai Jobe has the highest ceiling at this point, but the combination of the floor and ceiling and the expectation for Bryce Foster coming in right away is to start at center. You're touching the football every play. Like, you're going to have a huge impact on the team. Now, Bryce Foster's had to deal with some injuries. What if Bryce Foster, I feel like that's the safe answer, I guess, is what I'm kind of saying here. I feel like that is the safe answer, to say Bryce Foster. That probably is the right answer. What if we want to give the sexy answer, though? Bai Jobe would be the potential answer. Like, I think if you're talking about all of these players hitting their ceiling this year at Kansas, between Jobe, Wudke, and Foster, Jobe probably has the highest ceiling there in terms of the untapped potential. And honestly, if you're having a conversation of, for KU to be at their best, for Kansas to reach its ceiling, for the Kansas defense to, be at another improved level from last year, Bai Jobe would probably be the most helpful answer, because KU needs that good pass rusher. And you lost Austin Booker a year after losing Lonnie Phelps, a year after losing Kyron Johnson. Can you have somebody else who can step into those shoes, right? And if Bai Jobe hits his ceiling, he would be that guy. So that would almost be the most helpful for KU, but that's also the lowest floor probably of these 3 players. Maybe that floor gets raised because KU doesn't have an obvious answer to start at that kind of weak side defensive end position. But I mean, I don't know. Like, there's a chance that Bai Jobe is too raw this early on, and he's not like Dylan Brooks. They brought in as a former top 200 recruit, and he was too raw to really play last year. And we'll see how much he plays this year, right? So there's a chance that could happen. Honestly, I kind of want to settle somewhere in between, and this is going to actually be my pick. I'm going Dylan Wudke. I think Dylan Wudke is going to have the biggest impact of any of the transfers coming in for KU. Again, I think Bryce Foster will have a very big impact. But what if it's just more of a, you're a solid center. You did what you were asked to. It's kind of mashed potatoes, right? Like, what if Dylan Wudke has something else there that he can bring? And from some standpoint, I'm hesitant to pick this one because he might not even start. Like, Jeremy Robinson could very well. Jeremy Robinson's expected to start at the strong side defensive end. Now, maybe Wudke can play some of the other defensive end spot. I don't think he'd be the starter there. Maybe he can rotate in at both, though, to increase his snaps. But here's what I find interesting. Let's go back 2 years ago to when Jeremy Robinson and Malcolm Lee, they were basically splitting snaps, and both of them got a ton of snaps. I think Lee was actually technically the starter. Robinson played starter-level snaps, and I think that could happen with Robinson and Wudke. And so if even if he's not a starter, if he's getting 500, 600 snaps in the season, that's still plenty of opportunity to make a big impact on the defensive side of the ball. And I think Wudke is going to be a really nice addition for KU. You go back and look what he did at Youngstown State. So he was there for 5 seasons. He's a 6-year player. You're already talking about an older player that he was here for spring ball. So he got acclimated a bit with the system. I think he's going to do better in the fall than he did in the spring. Older player that's ready to go right away. And his last 3 years combined at Youngstown State, which, yes, it's an FCS school, but we've seen a lot of FCS kids make the jump recently to the Division I level and have a lot of success. And Youngstown State's been a solid squad there. He's had 24 TFLs over those last 3 seasons, and he's had 12.5 sacks. So that on average means about 8 TFLs per season and about 4 sacks per season over the last 3. Obviously, you'd have to adjust to say, okay, but now you're doing it against FBS. Now you're doing it against Power 5 level competition. Does that go down to, 6 TFLs and 3 sacks or 5 TFLs and 2 sacks or whatever? But then you also have to add in, well, he's a year older. He's a year stronger. He's a year better. What if he could get back up to those numbers? And if he ends up having, 7 tackles for loss and 3.5 sacks on this year's team, I know those sound like relatively modest numbers. Like 7, 7 tackles, 7 tackles for loss and 3.5 sacks. Like that's not getting you probably on like the All Big 12 first team, I guess, basically. But if we go back and look at last year's team, for instance, 7 tackles for loss would have been tied second on the team. 3.5 sacks would have been third on the team behind Jeremy Robinson, right? So those would be real impactful numbers for KU. And I look at the way he finished last season too at Youngstown State, where it's almost like he's playing his best football over the back half of the season. So over the first 4 games of the year for him, he had 1 sack, he had 1 tackle for loss on the season. Then he goes from week 5 on through the rest of their season, and he has 7 TFLs. And he records a TFL in, I guess what would that, he had multiple TFLs, more than 1 TFL on 3 occasions over that period of time. He just became like, it was like he was playing his best football, which I guess makes sense. The older you get, the better you're going to be. So continuously getting older, like he's going to continue to get better. I think he can make a real impact, even if he's not a starter. I think he's going to be a very solid player for KU. And on a defense that almost needs it more than the KU offense, that's going to be my pick. We're going to go with Dylan Wudke. But again, if you could pick one to hit their ceiling, you probably pick Bai Jobe. But I think Bryce Foster would probably be the other good answer here. All right, let's continue on with this episode. What about a transfer who's in their 2nd, 3rd, or 4th year at KU? What answer would that be for the biggest impact in 2024? This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Continuing on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks, what about a transfer who's in there maybe 2nd, 3rd, 4th year, a multiple year player at Kansas? Because nowadays that's as much of a game as anything. You're not just adding grad transfers. You're trying to add transfers who are going to be around for multiple years, and so they can have that bigger impact maybe in a 2nd or 3rd year when maybe they do have more experience under their belt. So short list of guys who I think would qualify there. Logan Brown will be in his 2nd year coming from Wisconsin. And there's some guys I might not mention that are going to be a part of this, but this would be my short list of guys I want to talk about here. Kobe Baynes, we mentioned him in the opening segment, and he'll be in his 3rd year at Kansas. Trevor Wilson and Doug Emilien, both, not in that starting lineup for the KU receivers, but both, 2 rotational receivers who will see playing time and still make an impact for KU. Cornell Wheeler, probably going to be a starting linebacker on this year's team. and he'll be in his, third or fourth year at Kansas after coming over from Michigan. And then you have Marvin Grant, who will be in his third year since coming over from Purdue. Those would be the guys who would be on the short list for me to have the conversation. I think I would eliminate Trevor Wilson or Doug Emilien. I mean, you are one injury away from one of those starting receivers. From one of Wilson or Emilien end up being the starter. Probably would be Emilien. I don't know. Maybe it'd be Wilson if they defaulted toward the senior guy. But we know Wilson's going to be or involved in special teams as well, to the chagrin of some. But he will have an impact in other ways there. But yeah, I don't think that's the answer because KU has those three studly starting receivers. So it just becomes a little bit more difficult there. I do think Doug Emilien could make a really big impact on the 2025 team. And I think you'll continue to see flashes this year on some plays that he gets to make like he did last year when he got a few chances. And then, which that'll just continue the, KU adding players from Minnesota that turn out to be really good for KU if that's the case. So I think to me, this is between Brown, Baynes, Wheeler, and Grant. And maybe I should eliminate Kobe Baynes from that if that's the conversation, because it feels like, I don't know, like I'd lean toward, if I'm predicting the starting offensive line, I would have Kobe Baynes, that other starting guard. But like I said, it could be Darrell Simmons Jr. So maybe because that being most in the air could mean somebody else. Now, maybe you could say if Calvin Clements got healthy, that'd be more of a toss-up with him and Logan Brown. But unfortunately, he's not healthy right now. Kobe Baynes has proven more at Kansas than Logan Brown, but Logan Brown, when he did play at Wisconsin, proved more than what Kobe Baynes has done at Kansas in terms of that collegiate performance, right? So kind of becomes interesting there. Brown plays, I guess, more of a pivotal position at left tackle than one of the guard spots. But honestly, I wouldn't pick either anyway, I guess. I think Cornell Wheeler would be an easy choice here. Now, I don't know. I guess it depends on the phrasing of this, because Marvin Grant probably is the best player of this group overall. So I guess from that standpoint, maybe that is the answer of a multi-year transfer to KU that is the best player. Probably is Marvin Grant. He was really good last year. I think he's only going to be better this year. The reason I take Cornell Wheeler is because I think the bar has not been set at the highest level for KU at the linebacker position the last couple of years. I think they've slowly built up that position, and it's gotten a little bit better each and every year, but they've still, whether you look at Pro Football Focus grades or what some of these preseason college football magazines say, or the production, this hasn't been one of the top half units in the Big 12 at the KU linebacker position. That's no secret. And so I think the bar that can be raised by having a good starter there, by having a good player there. And Cornell Wheeler was really good in more limited play last year and had some really highlight games a season ago. He can be more consistent this year. He's now got the green dot. Clearly that shows the leadership that the coaching staff has bestowed upon him and thinks highly of him. I think he has a chance to make a real big impact in a way that, like Logan Brown and Kobe Baynes could be starters on a good offensive line. And Marvin Grant could be a really good safety and all these things. But if KU's defense gets better and KU's linebacker unit looks night and day from where it was last year, the biggest impact would probably be coming from Cornell Wheeler. So that would be my pick for transfers in, outside of their first year at Kansas. Let's continue on. We're 62 days away from KU football's first game coming against Lindenwood. Let's discuss what that number signifies on this episode on our Football Friday of Locked On Jayhawks. First, we are brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs have gone away here, we get fewer games. Not so much, though, if you know where to find it, right? We got Euro going on with soccer. We got Copa America. We got the NBA draft going on. I mean, NHL draft. You've got golf tournaments, which I watch and tune into each and every week. The Royals are playing well. MLB is going on. There's still stuff to find. And FanDuel lets me keep the sports buzz going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most of your summer with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball and our official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, finishing things up on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Thank you to everydayers tuning into each and every show and making this a part of it. And again, check out my social media page at D Johnson Radio. We got a fun KU basketball trivia event. You can register teams up to 6 members of a team. Limited spots available at Johnny's in July. I think July 21st on a Sunday. So sign up for that, and you can learn more on my Twitter feed at D Johnson Radio. So we're 62 days away from KU football's first game of the season. It's against Lindenwood. And as we've been doing here, when we get to that on Football Fridays, we discuss what that number signifies. Well, 62, that's the average number of plays per game that Kansas averaged last season. They averaged 62 plays per game. That's on the lower end of not just the Big 12, but of the country. I mean, you're getting some teams who maybe average 80, 85 plays per game and what Kansas is going up against. That'll be interesting to see what that snap count is this year. You know, Jeff Grimes isn't somebody who's running like hurry up offense or anything, but I guess I wouldn't be surprised if that number does creep up more toward the mid 60s, maybe the high 60s. I'm not saying they should become a hurry up team. I don't think they should play to your strengths, but KU does have a really loaded offense. And I think it would behoove them to, maybe run a few extra plays per game. And also if you're having more success staying on the field more, although they did that a lot last year too, then maybe you're going to have more plays per game. I don't know. It seems like Andy Kohnlicke was able to get a lot of big plays for Kansas. Maybe Grimes is going to be more of a grinded out style. So maybe they will have the ball a little bit more, but that was also probably a way to, help your defense out a little bit more. Jason Bean completed 62% of his passes last season. I think that's probably the biggest upgrade for me from Jason Bean to Jalon Daniels. I think Jalon was also a tougher runner more consistently. Bean obviously had more speed, but Jalon was able to run better, like between the tackles and stuff. Both threw a good long ball. I think Jalon Daniels has more like velocity of arm strength, whereas Jason Bean has more lofted arm strength. Like he could throw a really high, beautiful deep ball, and that was something he did really, really well. And he threw really well on the run. But it's the consistency in the completion percentage. Like Jalen's been around 70%. Jason Bean in the low 60s. So that is something that those extra few completions on even the simple plays, that's one area, as long as Jalon can stay healthy, where you get that improvement. And then Savion Morrison had 62 rushing yards last year. That's it. You still have Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw. You have some guys nipping at the heels with like Harry Stewart and stuff. Is Savion Morrison going to play a bigger role on this year's team, right? Dylan McDuffie graduates away. He had like 250 rushing yards. That still is an opportunity there. Is Savion going to play a bigger role finally on this year's team in his third year as a former transfer from Nebraska? I think that'll be kind of interesting in what role Kansas can find for him. If there's their kick return role available, can you get more rushes at the running back position? But I would take the over if you were telling me based off last year's total. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page. We'll see you next time for another edition of LOJ. Have a great weekend.